I think the Hartman Fellowship has impacted me as a Jewish leader more than any other Jewish program that I've done, because it's sort of broadened my horizon on what exactly it means to be a Jewish teen.
You know you're at Hartman when people are laughing and joking, but also the next second they're talking about some serious rabbinic text.
The Hartman Teen Fellowship is an opportunity for teens who want more from Jewish learning. More depth, more connection, more ideas worth wrestling with.
You really get the opportunity to engage with your peers and run with content.
With Hartman's top faculty, fellows dig into Jewish life, their relationship to Israel, and their own leadership development.
There's just so much that could be going on that you can be pulled into any conversation, and you know there's a space for you.
Apply now for Cohort 5 of the Hartman Teen Fellowship, open to current 9th through 11th graders at shalomhartman.org/teens. That's shalomhartman.org/teens.
There's no better place than being at the Hartman Teen Fellowship.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Identity Crisis, a show from the Shalom Hartman Institute creating better conversations about the essential issues facing Jewish life. I'm Yehuda Kurtzer. We're recording on Monday, March 23rd, 2026.
There can be miracles when you believe. Oh, hope is free. It's hard to get. Who knows what miracles?
So, a classic question. What makes a piece of art? Literature, music, film? What makes it Jewish? This is a contentious question, a fundamentally unresolvable one for Jewish communities like ours here in America, who thrive as assimilated members of a broader society. It's not sufficient to say that an artist is Jewish, I think. In our great episode that we did last year on Christmas music, we talked extensively about how Jewish musicians and composers played a major role in the making of the Christmas canon. It's not sufficient to look at the Jewish themes in a piece of art. Because yes, of course, there are Jewish ideas and texts that inform many contemporary art and media pieces, but many of them, and not just the Hebrew Bible, have far broader appeal than just for Jews or the Jewish community. Even particularistic elements of Jewish culture are now considered part of the mainstream. Seinfeld and Curb made constant reference to Jewish customs and idiosyncrasies that could play for a laugh with non-Jewish audiences who understood such references to not really be Jewish exclusively anymore, but part of the American multicultural tapestry of identities that we all now share. And Jewish art definitely can't be defined as the stuff that's uniquely consumed by or targeted towards the Jewish community. That would mean that the only authentically Jewish art is the kitschiest, and I, for one, would not want to hinge this category on the Maccabees. So a few months ago, I was at a movie theater with my daughter Sally, and as part of the coming attractions, we saw the preview for an awful-looking animated movie about King David, which had a weird emphasis on a baby lamb. Sally was confused. I think she was trying to figure out, is that ours? Is that for us? The David movie is produced by a Utah-based outfit called Angel Studios, producing family-friendly and values-based content. The producers themselves are Mormon, but the target audience is more broadly Christian. This is King David in the Old Testament sense, more than in the Hebrew Bible sense. It was not for us, in other words, though sure, why not? We can watch it. By the way, Angel Studios' biggest hit so far is a movie called The Chosen. I got very excited about this until I realized it was about Jesus Christ and not about Danny and Ruvain. But a few decades earlier, a big movie tested this question of is it Jewish very differently. The Prince of Egypt was one of the first projects of DreamWorks SKG, the studio formed by the mega trio of Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen in 1994. Apparently, actually, the Prince of Egypt was discussed at one of the very first meetings of these three moguls, all of them Jewish. It was a project that Katzenberg wanted to do at Disney and couldn't get approval for. It emerged finally 4 years later with a star-studded cast. I'll list a bunch of them: Val Kilmer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Danny Glover, Steve Martin, Martin Short, Ralph Fiennes, Sandra Bullock, Jeff Goldblum, Patrick Stewart, Helen Mirren, and also included, less known to American audiences but beloved to many Jewish audiences, Ofra Chaza, an iconic Israeli singer who I think of as Israel's Whitney Houston, who, by the way, recorded that version that you heard at the top of the show of the movie's Oscar-winning song as a chart-topping pop hit together with Mariah Carey. Mariah and Whitney teaming up to sing this song would be like if Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo teamed up to do it today. By the way, they did. about 2 years ago. You can find their version on YouTube. Prince of Egypt was critically well received and did pretty well at the box office, made over $250 million. But it has aged extremely well and is a bit of a cult classic. This is definitely the case at the Hartman offices here in New York. We get weirdly excited about some episodes, and I have to say, this is one of them. So is Prince of Egypt Jewish? Well, it was made by a lot of Jews. It's pretty authentic to a lot of the version of the story in the Torah and the Midrashim, although we're going to work on that today, without any obvious Christian interpretive overlays that often appear in mass media about the Hebrew Bible. The movie couldn't possibly have been made for Jews, since we are a pretty small market, but it has lived on pretty powerfully in the contemporary Jewish cultural canon. Maybe the most Jewish thing about it, though, is that it evokes something deep about the Exodus, or rather about the afterlife of the Exodus. It seems like a way of telling the story of the Exodus that speaks to our evolving sensibilities. It entails storytelling in evoking memories laced with both trauma and exhilaration. It includes prayer, and it is a prayer. The Prince of Egypt feels Jewish because, in some strange sense, it reminds us about what Passover is supposed to be about. Not just its ideas, but its performance. So I would say, in response to my own question, I don't know if Prince of Egypt is Jewish, but I think it is ours. I'm excited to do a deep dive into the Prince of Egypt today, not because it is part of the news cycle, but it is part of the time of year where we talk about the Exodus. So this is part of our, and maybe your, listeners' preparation for Pesach. And I'm really excited to do this conversation today with a preeminent scholar of Bible and biblical interpretation, Rabbi Professor Burt Visotzky, who has an incredible bio, which I'm not going to read all 2 pages of it, although we'll link to it in our show notes. Winner of many prizes, boards of governors of major organizations and institutions, honorary degrees, a major leader in interfaith work, a longtime scholar at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he still serves as the Appelman Professor Emeritus of Midrash and Interreligious Studies. So there's a lot there, but most important for our purposes, Rabbi Visotzky was an actual consultant to the producers of The Prince of Egypt to help them get this story as right as possible. I'm hoping today is a learning session, helping us to understand the Prince of Egypt as text, but maybe even more importantly, to understand the Exodus as text in its afterlife as part of this film. So first of all, thanks for coming on the show today. Thanks for being here. I understand that as a non-podcast listener, this may be your first podcast. So in that case, mazel tov.
Actually, surprisingly, it's not my first podcast, but it might be the first one I listened to.
That's a win. So maybe just start by telling us the backstory of how it came to be that you were a consultant to this project, now 30 plus years ago.
Well, as all good things, it started with a Torah study group. I, for many years at JTS, ran a group that we self-importantly called The Prophets. And it was a mixture of rabbinics and Bible scholars and writers. Cynthia Ozick was among them. It was really, really fascinating to hear what happened when ideas clashed. I thought at first that I would learn how Midrash was created when writers approached the text. What actually happened, though, was I learned the pshat of the text, the meaning in context, because the writers were very nervous about elaborating too much. They actually felt that the Torah text was sacred.
Wow.
So what was called the Genesis Seminar had 5 years to work its way through. We did pretty much a chapter of the Torah per session. 50 sessions got us through the 50 chapters of Genesis. Just towards the end of our cycle of 5 years, I got a call from Bill Moyers. And Bill said, I would like to do discussions like this on the air, on public television. We've never done Bible on television. And then he revealed a secret. He had never done groups on television. He was always one-on-one. So he very graciously invited me to come on and do a Genesis seminar on TV. And there we were 10 Sundays in a row studying select stories of Genesis with a group of people very carefully selected for balance. There was a Jew, there was a Muslim, there was a Catholic, there was a Protestant, there was an evangelical Protestant, etc. And we had a really good time doing it. It aired in 1996, and while it was airing, I was home one afternoon and I got a call, And a woman's voice said, "Is this Rabbi Visotzky?" I said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Would you hold for Jeffrey Katzenberg?" So I said, "Sure." And while I was holding, I was thinking, which of my friends is playing a trick on me? And Katzenberg came on and said, "Is this Burt Visotzky?" And I said, "Yes, it is. Is this actually Jeffrey Katzenberg?" And he said, "Yeah, yes, it's really me. It's no joke." I said, "How can I help you?" He said, "I don't know if you know, but we formed a studio, Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen. And we wanted our very first project to be the story of the Exodus. We wanted to start with something incredibly powerful that spoke to the American ethos."
Oh, cool.
I said, I'm in. I said, "Now what?" He said, "Now you come to L.A." Well, as it turned out, they brought me back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, always first class, to L.A. because they were so paranoid about sending a cassette of what they had filmed, lest someone get their hands on it and pirate it, that they'd rather fly me first class than spend whatever it was, 79 cents, to send a cassette across the country. So I spent a lot of time in L.A. between 96 and 98, and we made a movie.
Wow.
I once made the terrible faux pas of referring to that film as a cartoon.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not.
Yeah, Jeffrey was not happy with that. He said, "It's an animated feature."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, it's an animated feature."
And by the way, it has been listed since then as one of the best animated films of all time because of the creativity of the animation. There was something very different about the angular nature of the animation. It pushed against some of the trends that are already emerging in Hollywood around animation.
Katzenberg was liberated from Disney when he left.
Yeah.
And he realized he could do things he never would have been able to do at Disney, including, I suggested to him at one point, I said, "Jeffrey, at Disney, everything was white, Snow White, 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 white." I said, "The Hebrews in Egypt were people of color. And when you watch the film, you'll see that among the slaves, there are lots of people of color."
Yeah.
And he just was thrilled at the opportunity. Kind of the mantra was not Disney. And created, I think, an extraordinary work as a result.
I want to get to the America line in a second because I think that's super interesting. But before that, it's just interesting to note that this phenomenon of the kind of encounter of writers and culture makers with text, the way you were describing as the seminar, first at the seminary and then on PBS effectively, it's interesting. It kind of is a little bit ahead of the same phenomenon that took place in Israel over the past 20 to 30 years, where culture makers, primarily musicians, have been studying Torah a lot, and it has become kind of de rigueur for them to do their one Jewish album. Some musicians completely turned around their careers to kind of use Jewish themes in their work, but it feels as though there was a kernel of that taking place here among Jewish culture makers as well.
I have a very good friend who's also an emeritus professor of Midrash named Avigdor Shinan. And Shinan was professor of Midrash and Agadah at the Hebrew University. And as it happens, Avigdor was here for a trip to see his in-laws. And I said to Jeffrey, "We have an incredible opportunity. One of the great scholars of biblical interpretation is in the States from Israel." So he flew me and Avigdor out. Wow. What I didn't know was it was Shinan's birthday weekend. So it was like the greatest birthday gift. And Shinan commented on it and was thoughtful about it. But he went back to Israel and told his friends, "You got to see this."
Yeah.
So he brought that news back to Israel. And because he was an influential professor, teacher, had tons of students, much beloved, that I think it became a thing. Yeah. So he should get credit for that.
That's incredible. So I want you to pick up on that comment that you made earlier about this as like a great American story or something that was meant for the American canon. It's hard not to read into that. Jews in prominent roles in Hollywood are narrating their own stories, the stories that are ours, in an idiom that makes them American as part of what feels like a larger ideological and political project of signaling to the general public the Jewish story is the American story and vice versa. So how conscious do you think that is? Even if it's not conscious, is that a fair read of what might have been taking place at the time?
Well, yes and no. Yeah. Jeffrey was very conscious of this.
Yeah.
I think everybody at SKG was nervous that people would think it was too Jewish.
Yeah.
So they were cautious to link it to the American ethos of rebellion against a enslaver, be it the British in the American Revolution or overweening politicians in the day. They were really, really careful lest it be too Jewish. When I would talk about a passage with Jeffrey, I sometimes lapsed into my own idiom, and I would say, this is a great Midrash. And every time I would say that, he would blanch. He would say, it's not Midrash. It's not Midrash. This is Hollywood, Burt. We are doing entertainment. We are doing significant entertainment. It's about something important, the Bible, but it's not Midrash, lest it think it's too Jewish.
What does that mean? What do you make of that? I mean, first of all, part of me is like, Midrash is entertaining.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you're right. He didn't thoroughly understand what Midrash was. Right. But I think what freaked him out was that it would have put the film, which they were going to lead with, right into the Jewish camp. And it was the one thing they were so nervous about because they were the three most prominent Jews in Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah, and I understand that you were one of the consultants, but there were consultants from other faith traditions. To what extent was that a collaborative project, or how much of it was, let us make sure that we don't get it wrong in a bunch of different places, especially since my understanding is that several Muslim countries banned the film from being shown because of the language of Moses as depicting a prophet. Yeah.
Jeffrey, when he was with Disney, had done a film called Aladdin, and he got roundly critiqued, appropriately so, because of the stereotypes of the Arabs, the Muslims, the genie itself. I mean, and he was really nervous about not committing that sin again. So he wanted to differentiate himself very, very clearly from that ilk. So he was kind of in a very awkward position. I remember, I laugh every time I remember this. The film was already in the can. They were already well advanced. It was maybe a couple of weeks before opening day. And unusual for Hollywood, they opened this film worldwide, not just in the States, worldwide, all on the same date. And I get a call from Jeffrey. And he says, Burt, I've been thinking about this, and I'm nervous about the Aladdin problem. And, well, here's my question. This story about the Exodus, does it have to be Egypt? And I said, yeah, Jeffrey, it kind of has to be Egypt. But if it'll help you, it was Egypt then, not Egypt now. Oh, yeah, good. Then, now, then. Excellent. I'm a little bit parodying Jeffrey because he couldn't have been more gracious and more really, really concerned that he was, quote unquote, true to the biblical story. Not verbatim true, but like a midrashist might say, true.
Right. I mean, you could have gone the route of Michael Waltzer's line at the end of Exodus Revolution where he says, wherever you are, it's probably Egypt. Right. It could have been anywhere.
Right,
but the original story does actually take place in Egypt. To what extent were you concerned as a scholar of Bible and of biblical interpretation that you were going to be connected to a project that would, quote unquote, get it wrong or misrepresent pieces of the story in ways that you would have felt, the Torah has 70 faces, but it doesn't have 71.
Right. So first, let me come back to the consulting thing, though. I was one of the chief consultants, as was a scholar at Clark University, Everett Fox. Everett had put out a translation, a wonderful translation of the Torah, called The Five Books of Moses, cleverly. And it was just a real solid read, and that became kind of the core text for us. And then there was a lawyer who had worked for the ADL for a while, a woman named Sivya Schwartz-Katzug, who DreamWorks hired to do community outreach. So the three of us really made an effort to bring in everybody and their uncle that we knew, particularly non-Jews, to come on out to Hollywood. Let's have a road trip, but to get everyone on board and make sure that people were okay. For me, I was concerned. I was concerned, A, that it could be complete kitsch, B, that they would really dreadfully get the story wrong. But I had seen the storyboards. You go into the studio and you literally could walk around the studio, and I'm looking at the storyboards and everything looks right, but there was one thing that kind of mystified me a little bit. I said, Jeffrey, on top of and underneath each of the storyboards is a thread. It's either red or blue, and it's going up and down. What's that all about? And he said, the one on top is the background hue of the actual film itself. I said, it makes a difference? He said, oh, yeah. And the difference is the bottom thread. The hue in the background affects the mood of the viewer. And we are charting where and what we want the viewer to feel every 6 seconds. So I was like, wow, really? And he said, really. We are concerned that we make a film that effectively makes the viewer utterly sympathetic with the Israelites leaving Egypt, because that's everybody's story.
It makes me kind of want to do that exercise with the Torah itself. How conscious is the Torah of the emotional state of us as readers throughout the story? How anxious are we supposed to be every single time that Pharaoh comes and says, I will not let your people go?
So I do want to say that we have our own thread above and below the words of the Torah, and we call that Tameh HaMikra, the trup. Right? The Masoretes in the Middle Ages kind of signal to us how we should divide up the verses, what the mood was. Is this going to be a pazer? Right? You can really indicate emotional valence with the Tameh HaMikra, and I think they did.
I have 1,000 questions on that, but that's not our episode. I want to listen to a couple of the key clips from the film, and then I want to do a little bit of Midrashic work together about the choices that are being made and how that sings with how we might ordinarily read the text and how the Midrashim, another layer of interpretation. I agree, Jeffrey Katzenberg, it's not Midrash, but how the Midrashim themselves may have informed the choices in the film. So the first we're going to listen to comes right near the beginning, and it is a piece when Ofra Chaza, who plays Yocheved, Moshe's mother, places baby Moses in the water. And actually, this is a piece in the film which actually takes place in Hebrew itself. She speaks in Hebrew, which is already a kind of a move. So let's listen to a short piece of this.
ילדי הטוב והרע אל תירא ואל תפחד My son, I have nothing I can give but this chance that you may live I pray we'll meet again if he will deliver
Okay, so first of all, let's talk a little bit about the Hebrew. What was the choice involved with that? That seems kind of nuts.
It's kind of overwhelming. I think, first of all, they wanted an Israeli singer.
Yeah.
They wanted the accent, they wanted the voice, and I think she suggested that they open in Hebrew. As it happens, it's not just those couple of lines. In another one of the songs, they refer to God as Elohim, God on high, and then at the Exodus itself, they actually sing Mi Chamocha.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We're going to do that clip too.
I mean, so we're talking about at least a half dozen lines of biblical Hebrew being sung in a Hollywood animated feature.
Although this particular phrase is semi-biblical Hebrew. It's an interesting move to actually put it in a kind of hybrid of some biblical language. Al terav al techat has biblical
does,
echoes, right? But not from this context. But the very phrase itself is spoken by a modern Israeli woman who doesn't know biblical Hebrew but only knows modern Hebrew. It's very striking to listen to.
Yes, may she rest in peace. She was a wonderful collaborator. You know, that Yaldi Harach v'hatov, you could hear any Israeli mother or grandmother saying that.
Yeah, my sweet, my soft child.
Yes, it really caught people's attention.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the interpretive choices that are being played out here. Even the term deliver us, one of my colleagues pointed out in preparation, deliver us as a kind of rendering of all of the different verbs that appear in the biblical story, v'hotzeiti, v'yitzaldi, v'heveti, v'ga'alti, all of those, right, which we use throughout the Seder. We should put in the Haggadah, right? What do you think is the choices there? And I also it's worth naming that God is referred to as a he in this account, and I'm wondering whether that ever came up in any discussion of like God's gender as appearing in the story.
It did not.
Hollywood today would have made a very different choice. Yeah.
I think it was not quite as burning an issue in those days, and I embarrassedly say I didn't raise it. That was not one of the questions they asked about God's gender. But God's role and God as deliverer, I think maybe came in, there's a recording of one of the songs that's almost done in gospel style. And I think deliver us is gospel.
Let's actually listen to that right now, because one of the recordings that came out on the soundtrack afterwards was this exact song of the lullaby that Yocheved sings, performed by Amy Grant, who's a Christian musician. So let's hear a short clip of that right now, and we can finish the point.
Hush now, my baby, be still, love, don't cry. Sleep like you're rocked by the stream. Sleep and remember my lullaby, and I'll be with you when you dream.
So you can hear it, right? The music is the same. By the way, it's still kind of faintly Middle Eastern music. It's in the minor key. It's
yes,
not
indeed. The bridge right after this is very Middle Eastern with a little pipe. And
yeah, that's right. It's now a little bit country, and it's a little bit Christian. So you're saying that you think that is supposed to evoke something about the gospel.
Kind of informed the choice of deliver us.
Yeah. Anything else about what's happening rightly or wrong here in that sense, or interpretively is probably a better phrase, with respect to the fact that the story of the family drama about Yocheved and placing the baby in the water actually is very sparse in the biblical text, and the central role that it plays here? Any thoughts about that?
I would say that for me, the visuals are brilliant. The crocodiles, the hippopotamus shows up, and then again it goes to soft music and until eventually Pharaoh's wife, which is definitely different than the biblical narrative, discovers baby Moses. And then you have, why do they do that? I asked him explicitly. I said, you know it's Pharaoh's daughter, don't you?
Yeah.
He said, I do. He said, but I've been told that in the Muslim tradition, it's Pharaoh's wife. I said, and you want to rely on that? He said, well, I want to rely on that for a very good Hollywood reason. I said, what's that? He said, I want the brothers, right?
Yeah.
The Egyptian brother and Moses, who are going to be in competition with each other. I want it to be a buddy movie, right? And once he said that, like you can see it throughout the film, it's a buddy movie.
Right.
When Moses looks back, calls to Pharaoh, knows his brother is drowning in the sea. That's the pathos of every buddy movie we've ever seen, whether it's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid or any other one you want to name.
Let's spend another minute on that, because it is the biggest interpretive conceit of the movie, is to position Pharaoh and Moses as separating brothers. There's something so interesting about it, because from the standpoint of the book of Genesis, that's the right story. Right? It's always the rupture between the two brothers, which, by the way, is not caused by them. It's caused by larger forces. The promise of God to the father almost requires of the father to choose between the two sons, right? But it's supposed to carry, we think, into the story of Exodus. So as a scholar of Midrash, it sounds like you were like, okay, well, I guess it's a Hollywood movie, so they can do whatever they want. But did you feel that this captured something that's useful in how we think about the story of the Exodus itself?
Well, for me, because I'm deeply engaged in interreligious dialogue, I liked that we could rely on the fact that there are Muslim traditions about this. In other words, we look at the story and we know the words in the Torah. But as a midrashist, I also understand that there's oral Torah. Mm-hmm. And oral Torah often departs from the contextual meaning of the text, the pshat of the text, and goes somewhere else. And I think he had good cause to go somewhere else on this. Yeah. So I had no interest in fighting this one. I thought it was a good call.
I think as a viewer of the film, I think what it has done is it's helped me in the story of the Exodus in trying to understand more deeply the extent of the emotional relationship between Moses and Pharaoh as interlocutors throughout the Exodus, where it's not Moses is a random Hebrew child who grew up in the house of the Pharaoh, but actually had an intimate relationship with Pharaoh that actually you don't get from the text itself.
I think you're right.
But it could.
It should be there.
Yeah.
And yet the narrative in the Torah is shtum. It's like quiet about that.
Yeah.
You don't see it. And bringing that out, drawing that out, I think is terribly important. That Moses wasn't just some schmo who God chose. Moses was almost literally from childhood raised in the house of Pharaoh. He knew what the stakes were. He knew how to approach Pharaoh. He knew how to contest Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, sometimes gets lost in the reading of the text we simply do when we read it in shul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also helps in the film. One of the things they do very well is that Moses is election, which we'll talk about now, actually creates a massive crisis of his own identity for him, right? Which you get echoes of when Moses sees the Israelite being beaten by the Egyptian taskmaster. The decision to identify with the Israelite over the taskmaster shifts his whole positionality in the story, and it's about a reclamation of identity. But in good Hollywood form, that becomes inflated as self-discovery. And you can't be more American and modern than a person who finally identifies with who they really are, engages in that process of self-discovery.
And the self-identity is, I stand with the downtrodden, with the oppressed, not with the oppressor. Even though I was raised with the oppressor and might even look by my dress like the oppressor, I stand with the downtrodden, and those are my people.
And those are my people, yeah. So one of the more, I guess, contestable or kind of big question choices of the film comes around the scene of the burning bush, which we're going to listen to a little bit here, because that's the moment when God becomes revealed in the story, both in terms of God's voice and some visuals. I can only imagine the theological discussions that go into how is Hollywood going to depict this. Let's listen for a moment to the clip from the burning bush episode in the film.
You've chosen the wrong messenger. How can I even speak to these people? Who made man's mouth? Who made the deaf, the mute, the seeing, or the blind? Did not I? Now go!
Moses, I shall be with you when you go to the king of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not listen. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders.
Tell me what's going on here with the choices that the film is making on who voices the voice of God, the multiplicity that's going on here.
So therein lies the tale. That inadvertently illustrates precisely the question I think you're asking. Originally, they invited everyone who had a speaking part in the animated feature to read God's lines. And they were going to mix them into this eerie voice. I mean, you can hear a little bit of their intention with the woo-woo music that's in the background. But despite the best capabilities of Hollywood soundmen, every time they tried to do it, it didn't work. And they were utterly mystified. Why couldn't they mix these voices? I pointed out to them that in the Midrash suggests that the voice that Moses heard had to be appealing to him, not frightening, and that it was, in fact, a voice that sounded like his father. And Jeffrey said, no, I don't want to do father. So, okay, good.
We did that with Star Wars. We're not doing that here.
No father. Right, Moses, I am your father. So they tried every which way to get this voice. And finally, Val Kilmer said, why don't I just do it? You can put on special effects. Let me do it. And he did. And it worked. So that's what we have. But essentially, you have now Moses echoing his own voice.
Say more about that. Like, it feels very significant, actually, and not crazy to imagine that the voice of Moses and the voice of God are actually the same voice. It's an interesting shiur. It's an interesting theological question of God speaking in a language that people can relate to and understand. Maybe it's our own voice, right?
Well, I mean, the voice of God is a perennial riff in Midrashic and even biblical literature. What was the voice we heard at Sinai? What was the voice that spoke and brought the world into being? What is the valence of that voice? How do you depict it? And I think that's a fair question. To the extent to which we say that we are created in God's image and likeness, we don't usually think about the fact that image and likeness may also include sound, that we sound like God. I say that, and as soon as I say that, in the back of my head, I have memories of my childhood rabbi speaking on Rosh Hashanah. And it was like hearing the voice of God. It was like, just this powerful, beautiful elocution that I would have followed anywhere. And I think that's partly what they're driving at there. And I think that's partly what motivated Val Kilmer.
It's so interesting. I mean, there are theological problems with this, one of which is, even the very idea of human beings being created in the image of God. If you take the evil version of that idea, which is so essential to the book of Genesis, you have human beings creating themselves as God, right? So idolatry and our belief that we are created in the image of God feel like two sides of the same coin. You can actually make yourself into God. If that's the voice that Moses is hearing, maybe it helps to explain some of his own self-doubt. Am I hearing God, or am I hearing my own voice inside my own head that's telling me to do things that are risky and dangerous?
But I think you're onto something about my own voice in my own head, because the Bible makes clear to us that Moshe had a speech impediment.
Mm-hmm.
He was kaved peh, whatever that means, heavy of tongue. And yet in the film, he speaks perfectly clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And we discussed this at DreamWorks. And Jeffrey said, I can't put a stutterer. I just can't do that. As he stuttered his way through the sentence. He said, I can't do that. He's got to be understandable to every listener, from the smallest kid to the oldest adult. So the voice that's in Moses' head, I'm certain as a Midrash can be, that when Moses thought, he did not think in stutters. He thought clearly. And he thought, much as he heard the voice of God, is a very, very clear voice. So the fact that it's depicted that way, good on Jeffrey.
How do the Midrashim make sense of Moses' doubt throughout the story, of his own lack of conviction? I mean, I think the human hubris, which is so clear in the prophets, is that when God speaks to you, it's a language of certainty. Jeremiah says, I had self-doubt because they were beating me up, but when God spoke to me, what could I do? I had the voice of God in my ear. But Moses goes to a very different level. It's like Moses doesn't really want to go, and he keeps not wanting to go, and he keeps getting rebuffed. How do the Midrashim make sense of Moses' own seem to be built-in resistance?
I think that the Midrashim pick up from Scripture the same way that the film does, which is they provide Moses with a support system of his brother and then his sister. And that support system, and ultimately his wife as well, that allows him the ability to say, I'm not alone in this. I can go on, and I can do a task that I would rather not. But my family, literally my family, are urging me to do this, and I can't let them down.
So let's actually listen to the pivotal point in the story. I think my favorite scene in the whole movie. We'll listen to a little bit from the 10 Plagues. It's just amazing animation. Let's listen to a bit, then I have a couple of questions now.
Okay.
You who I call brother, how could you have come to hate me so? Is this what you wanted? I said the storm, I said the Then let my heart be hardened, and never mind how high the cost may grow. This will still be so. I will never let your people go. Thus saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord. I will not let my people go.
So, by the way, from a standpoint of the story, that very phrase, all I ever wanted, is something that appears earlier in the film when it's described Moses' desire to simply be a prince of Egypt. And then in this, it gets repeated musically by Pharaoh, this time voiced by Ralph Fiennes. By the way, Ralph Fiennes had a real bad run of evil. If you remember, he was the commandant in Schindler's List in 1994, and then he graduates from that to Pharaoh. It's like working back the timeline. And I think to your point, illustrating that actually his intimacy with Moses is greater than Moses' intimacy with Miriam and Aaron, who are strangers to him by this point in the story, which really gets elevated in the telling of the story in The Prince of Egypt.
So I want to say that the overarching problem with the plagues in the film Prince of Egypt was how to not depict them.
Yeah.
Hollywood would have been brilliant at giving us Dam, Svardeya, Achaemenid blood, frogs. And Katzenberg realized that this was a film that a lot of kids were going to watch.
Yeah.
And he was loath to give them nightmares. He said, I could do a really good job here, but I won't.
Right.
I don't want this to be the scene that everybody's going to have in their nightmares. It just can't be. So he mixed them into one fairly short scene, the length of that song.
Yep.
I give him, again, credit for his sensitivity to I'm thinking of that thread going up and down, to the emotions of his viewers. He was very careful to make the plagues, if you will, anodyne, even though in both the plain reading of the text and almost all of the Midrash on the text, the plagues were spectacular.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting because you tend any Seder that has little kids at it these days, especially in America, which the Seders I know better, the plagues are considered a site of tremendous entertainment.
Well, yeah, because you can have 10 finger puppets.
You have finger puppets. My bubby used to kind of surreptitiously collect a whole bunch of plastic frogs and then unleash hell on the table and throw them out. The first time she did it, everyone was so stunned. It was like great comedy.
It is great.
This is not comedy. I mean, this is a horror film.
And he understood that.
Yeah.
He understood that he could not and should not treat it as comedy, that it was awful, that it was terrible, in all the kind of biblical terms, terrible, awesome, frightening. He wanted to depict it all, but he wanted to get through it kind of in one breath, like we would say the sons of Haman, just let's do it in one breath and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
And that is what he did.
I think the other thing that's happening in the move that the script makes, if you watch it carefully, you'll notice that they're out of order as well, right? So I was watching it again last night in preparation.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Okay.
Actually, it's you see it dances between like the animals dying and then the frogs. You don't see the river turn into blood. You just see them drinking water and it turns into blood and they spit it out. One of the things that I like about that as a Midrash, Jeffrey Katzenberg as a Midrash, is that it helps to also illustrate the chaotic sensibility. When it's narrated in the Bible, these are just events that take place in sequence. This one happened and then it was finished. And then this one happened.
So I want to ask you as a rabbi.
Yeah.
From the first plague of blood to the killing of the firstborn, how much time elapsed?
Oh, man. I'm being tested, I feel.
You are. Because the Bible doesn't tell you how much time elapsed.
Right.
But the rabbis do.
Oh, yeah? What do the rabbis say?
They say it took place in 1 year.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, wow, that was one hell of a year.
Right.
But I think they understood it was smart to put a timeline on it, to understand what a nation could go through of horrors.
Yeah. It feels relatable. We lived through a plague that, in retrospect, will feel like a short period of time, but felt quite long. We've lived through wars.
You're talking about COVID.
Yes. We've lived through a 5-year period of time where these were actually happening in sequence.
Right.
But you might feel, hopefully, please God, 10 years from now, all of these will have ended. You might feel like, oh my God, there was this window of time where everything was chaos.
Right.
And a film captures that of like, this was just a chaotic period of time. I have no idea how much time passed. When you're in the middle of it, it feels interminable. After each plague is done, Pharaoh's ability to say, I guess we're done with that, and then we can move on becomes logical. Like, it's over now. We've moved on.
And never mind.
That's right. One other line in the text that I want to just pick up on is when Pharaoh says the phrase, let my heart be hardened, which takes away the power of the text that it's actually God doing the hardening of Pharaoh's heart.
But that's a moral conundrum. The fact that Exodus tells us God hardened Pharaoh's heart and says it more than once. So I always try to figure out what's going on there. And in my humble opinion, and here I don't do humility usually, but here I am humble because I'm offering an interpretation that's not grounded in Midrash. I think what God is doing to Pharaoh is removing his free will. He's hardening Pharaoh's heart. And that essentially attacks Pharaoh's humanity. It's as though God says, you pretend to be God, I'm going to make you less than human. You will have no volition any longer. I'm going to harden your heart. You won't be able to decide what to do. And that kind of tracks for me as a reading of the story.
And you don't read that as unfair?
Unfair to whom?
To Pharaoh.
I don't think that fairness comes into how we treat Pharaoh.
I'm not saying Pharaoh's a good guy. I'm not trying to do a referendum on that. But the moral conundrum arises where if God is doing all of the work of removing Pharaoh's free will, then it's hard to blame Pharaoh for all that comes next.
All that comes next, but all that came before, we can certainly blame
that came
Pharaoh.
before.
And there's a lot of all that came before.
Yeah.
You know, we sing in the Haggadah a line from Psalms, Shvo chamatcha al hagoyim. which we always sing to the tune of Glory, Glory, Hallelujah.
I'm
I'm
going to do that. That's good.
But
Pour out your wrath.
pour out your wrath on the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And, I come from a tradition where we almost always have non-Jews at the Seder.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an awkward line to read. But the rest is Asher lo yaducha, who do not know you. And I think that's a real reading of how to react to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Pharaoh will not recognize God as an equal, which is crazy.
Yeah. I think Shvo Chamacha is a very important piece of the Seder because you have to make space in all of this language of freedom in the hope for a kind of eschaton when everything is resolved.
Well, that's why we sing Eliyahu Hanavi then.
You have to make space for anger too.
Right.
And
right.
that's also a part of this story. The Israelites are allowed to be furious at their treatment. There's so much like, how could the Israelites have taken the gold and silver from their neighbors? Like, come on.
Yehuda, I think you're right. Anger is essential there. And we, maybe as American Jews, as moderns, we're afraid of anger. We get nervous about it.
Yeah.
And there has to be a point, maybe a limited point in the Seder. And again, we immediately shift into singing Eliyahu Hanavi and Kumbaya.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. One last clip, which is really the climax of the film and one of the most famous scenes, which is right after the actual Exodus. And again, the time frame in a film is going to be compressed, right? The time between when they leave and when they cross over the Red Sea. And actually, the violence against the Egyptians is underplayed.
Yes, very much so.
Right? And in fact, Pharaoh gets saved, right? We can talk about that in a moment. But let's just listen to this short piece about the crossing of the Red Sea. The first time where that song that we heard at the outset, There Can Be Miracles, is sung. And we're going to listen to a clip here.
There can be miracles when you believe. When you believe, though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. It's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve? You can achieve when you believe. Somehow you will when you believe.
I get teary-eyed every time.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So, first of all, that's a good bit of Hebrew.
Yeah.
Exodus chapter 15, the Song at the Sea. Selected, but brilliantly rendered.
Yeah.
And I dare say it changed the way synagogues treat that passage when we get to it on Shabbat Shirah. But the thing that I want to talk about is what they sing afterwards. There can be miracles if you believe. Because that was not the original lyric.
Oh.
The original lyric was, you can do miracles if you believe. And Everett Fox and I, who talked to each other about our role as advisors, both said, oh, that's just, you can't say that. We're not the ones doing the miracles.
Right.
So unbeknownst to Jeffrey, we colluded. And separately, we said, Jeffrey, that's really problematic. You're not doing the miracles. God's doing the miracles. Yeah. What about if you changed it to God will do miracles? He says, oh, I don't know. Too much God. That's going to make people really uncomfortable. How about there can be miracles? We said, done.
Yeah.
So that's how that lyric got written. But it started out with something which was a very different theology.
Yeah.
If anything, an anthropology. Yeah. And we changed it so that it would be more in tune with, I think, the biblical narrative and the point of the story.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing that because to me, actually, I say this at our Seder every year, the whole premise of the Exodus was, if you're willing to take the risk in the midst of a totalitarian society where you're being oppressed, of trusting in God prior to the Exodus, the main act of faith takes place prior to the Exodus. There's no kunz in faith after the Exodus. But the Israelites take a lamb, slaughter it, paint its blood on the doorposts, make their faith visible to their neighbors, And it is because of that act of faith that the miracles take place for them. So in that sense, this is a direct rendering by the end of the story of, oh yeah, when you believe, there can be miracles that are performed.
But it's also consequential. It's Ve'amidu B'Adonai, first believe in God, and then Uva Moshe Avdo. Then once you believe in God, you can believe that Moshe can lead you out.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing you need is that belief.
So let's conclude with the last piece, which I alluded to before, which is Pharaoh getting saved in the story here, which I believe is a Midrashic echo, because doesn't Pharaoh wind up being identified with, who is it, Og?
Yeah, there are Midrashim like that, but
that Pharaoh lingers as a kind of witness of the Exodus to later in history when he keeps resurfacing as kind of an enemy of the Israelites.
So on one hand, I have to be careful because I was absolutely flabbergasted, wowed, that Jeffrey Katzenberg had read everything there was in English on the Exodus narrative, including like Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews, including all the notes in the footnote volumes.
Mm-hmm.
He was thoroughly versed in this. But again, I think that Pharaoh's surviving that goes back to the Bunny movie, that they wanted that, across the sea when I think it's Ray Fiennes, says, Moses, and you see him just lingering there on the rock, watching all of his troops destroyed.
Yeah.
I do want to say one Midrashic note, though. As they went through the sea, I pointed out to Jeffrey that the Midrash is very clear, where it says, V'hamayim lahem chomal mimimanu yismalam, that the water was walls right and left, that each tribe had its own path through the sea, its own kind of private path with walls. And then the Midrash says, and furthermore, lest someone from one tribe worry about their cousin in another tribe, God put windows into the walls so you could look through and see, oh, there's your uncle.
Yeah.
He's okay.
Yeah.
And Katzenberg mirrored that in an odd way. He had these kind of walls that you could see through the water, as it were. And there's a beautiful scene where you're looking through the wall of water, and this huge fish goes by, and you realize, like, wow, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
So I think they captured it well. I do a lot of scholar in residence in synagogues around the country over many, many years. And in the 25 years, I think it is, since Prince of Egypt, maybe a little more, I am seeing more and more families who either on Seder night or before Seder or during Chol HaMoed, they watch Prince of Egypt. That has become part of their ritual of celebrating Passover. And I'm really proud to have had some small part in it.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been a delight. I not only learned more about this movie that I love and that you played such an important role in, but also learned some Torah together.
Yeah,
pretty great.
Always good.
Amazing. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach to everyone listening, indeed.
Here are some other things that are happening at the Shalom Hartman Institute. The newest issue of Sources, the journal you turn to for informed conversations and thoughtful disagreement about the issues that matter to our Jewish communities, launches online this week. This issue, The Ever-Learning People, asks how learning can shape belonging, responsibility, peoplehood, and Jewish life in a democratic world. Read, share, and subscribe to our print edition at the link in the show notes. Subscribers can expect copies to hit their mailboxes in the coming weeks. Thanks for listening to our show, and special thanks to our guest, Rabbi Burt Visotzky. Identity Crisis is produced by Tessa Zitter, and its executive producer is me, Maytal Friedman. This episode was researched by Gabrielle Feinstone and edited by Josh Allen, with music provided by SoCalled. Transcripts of our show are now available on our website, typically a week after an episode airs. We are always looking for ideas for what we should cover in future episodes. So if you have a topic you would like to hear about, or if you have comments on this episode, please write to us at identitycrisis@shalomhartman.org. For more ideas from the Shalom Hartman Institute about what's unfolding right now, sign up for our newsletter in the show notes and subscribe to our podcast everywhere podcasts are available. See you next time, and thanks for listening.